All right, continuing with this, right? More I've never heard of Entex, an American toy company known for its dedicated handheld and tabletop gaming systems. So everybody was trying to get in on the racket here, okay? But by the time they were able to get something out, right, it was already getting to the end of the boom, right? The system was short-lived, so I never even heard of this. Okay? Only 6 games were released, like baseball, So a throwback to this, I remember those handheld games. They're not in here, but they had handheld games. These were like liquid crystal things, so they're kind of like, I guess you'd say almost fake video games, but not really. Right? I remember the other games, the football game. They had the handheld ones where all it was a friggin' light, and you would move the light around, and the other lights would come at you like players of the other team. Does anybody remember those? I remember people having those. The guy didn't have them in this. I don't know why. I think those were like, I forgot who made them, Milton Bradley or some company that made games made those. But a lot of people had those, and I didn't see them in this book. So now we get stuff more a Japanese one, Epoch Cassette Vision. Never heard of it. Right? Interesting. And it was already kind of coming out a little late, but apparently, right? It sold well. Okay, despite this, the inexpensive cassette vision and a small library of games, right, sold well. Okay, that's interesting. And apparently this thing, maybe this Epoch was most for its. Okay, maybe some of those other games, some of them were this one. So I probably played some of these as well, right? These Epoch was a Japanese company known in the United States for its LCD handheld systems in the early 80s. So right off the bat, the Americans are on top, right? And these little Japanese handheld games, liquid crystals, right? Displays, which were very gimmicky in the 80s. So you think, the Japanese are making these cheap little games, trying to cut in on the action. You have no idea historically what's going to happen in just 3 years, right? So the VTech. So this is another one. I never heard of it. So I like this. It was in Australia. It was known as the Dick Smith Wizard. All right, that sounds Australian, doesn't it? Something like they would make. No offense to Australians. And Entex tried to make another one here. Like these, I remember this kind of game. They made these kind of games too, but apparently, right, this didn't do well, which is funny because now it's selling for like thousands of dollars on eBay. So, and then what is this, Emerson Arcade? So you see people are trying to make these, trying to cut in, but they were just coming in just too late. Right? So now the video game crashed. Now I didn't know that this happened as a kid. I just, you just play the Atari. And apparently this it was oversaturated by 82 holiday season. The gaming market was completely oversaturated. So, and it didn't do well. The fallout was severe. It took just a few months for America's hottest industry to become a wasteland. America, the wasteland. It's gonna be more of that. Third-party game publishers that survived, like Activision, moved to making computer games. Mattel and Magnavox discontinued their consoles. Right? Atari went through some restructuring, but it would never capture the success it had in its glory days. But what is this? With the American leaders gone, the door was left open for Japanese companies to come in and claim the industry. Yes, this was going to happen. And I remember when it did, right? The third generation, the American market was in shambles. Although the arcades, and I'll show it in another thing I'll review at some point. The home systems were oversaturated in shambles, but people were still going to the arcades. The video games were getting crazier in the arcades. But obviously Japanese consoles, the people making those little liquid crystal games that you get in Chinatown for cheap that you laughed at, well, look, they were coming up. They were creeping up, son. There we go. The NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System. Right. And this is when I remember seeing, anyway, I'll get into that. So, Sega, of course, Sega made video games in the arcade, right? And it's interesting, Sega was not originally Japanese. It was American businessmen, right, who brought slot machines and arcade cabinets to the U.S. military bases in the 40s. But eventually, I guess it morphed into a Japanese company. Interesting. Yeah. Of course, there was an American division, but this was the first Sega. Now, this was basically, this and the ColecoVision were the same level of graphics. So, but this game never came to the United States. And apparently, it didn't do well in Japan. It came out the same day as the Famicom. Okay, what the hell is the Famicom? They changed the name of the Famicom to something that you're all gonna know of. Okay, it wasn't a complete failure. Sega modified and updated the system, but this is interesting. The video games on this. I used to play an emulator that I can't play anymore for some reason. It doesn't work on my laptop, but there were some crazy games on there. They were anime games. Okay, like I said, this was like a ColecoVision, and apparently there were bootleg systems made in Taiwan, which you'll hear a lot of, where the Sega and the Coleco, they made something that could play both games. So, and if you look at YouTube channels of this system, some of the games are really cool. I mean, people make fun of them. They're primitive. They're not as good as the Nintendo games, to be frank, but some of them are pretty charming. The Japanese aesthetic, the anime aesthetic is all throughout a lot of them. So, and this is the updated version. Now, you remember that? Well, so this is Nintendo Famicom. What the hell is this? You tripping? What's so special about this? Well, look at the controller, right? You see that? But what is this Famicom? Well, this Famicom comes out, right? It's like, look at this. This is a joke. This is gonna be a huge thing, right? Well, I'll skip ahead here. The Famicom just gets restructured with the outside, and it becomes something called the Nintendo Entertainment System. I think maybe you might have heard of it. So interesting. And I remember one of my neighbors, he got this, right? All the Asian kids I knew got these, right? Went over to his house, went up to another guy's house, playing this. Holy crap. This was like another world. Now, of course, people make fun of the old Nintendo, all the primitive graphics. But dude, you gotta understand, when you saw this in 85 and 86, and you're familiar with the 2600, and you've seen the Intellivision, you've never played the ColecoVision, okay, and you see this graphics on this thing, okay, you're like, holy crap, this is really good. This is like way better than the Atari graphics. It's not even close. 700 plus games released for this thing, and this thing had a lot of legs. So, and it's funny too, they got other ones trying to get into Casio, made their own video game system, right? But it didn't do too well. Okay, apparently, even though they used the same processor, the 780, there was something right. There was something wrong. They screwed up something in development, and it just, obviously doesn't exist anymore. This one, the Super Cassette Vision, apparently this was relatively popular also, and they did, right, they made exclusive games based on like Doraemon and Lupin the Third, right? Right, and they updated it to try to go against the Famicom, but I guess it just didn't work out. But still, they had 30 games on here. If you look this up on YouTube, there's people who still like this system and make homebrews for this system. Very interesting. Oh, look at this. The console had a small release in France. It was rebranded as the Yino Super Cassette Vision. Okay, interesting. All right, so obviously Nintendo. You can say it ends here, but you gotta understand something. I'm gonna wrap this up. Right? Okay, yours truly. Finally, I was gonna get another video game system. I couldn't wait. Right? The Sega Master System. This came out. I said everybody has Nintendo. I want to get this thing. Look how cool this looks. The Sega Master System, right? When it came out, right? The control pads. Do you remember the control pads? Anyone who had this? If you had this, you probably weren't in America, because I'll tell you what happened with this, but you could screw on little joysticks on this. So they were kind of hybrid pads, but people liked the joysticks. You could put the joysticks in there, okay? This thing was great. This thing had graphics as good as Nintendo, okay? It was built off that Sega 1000 that never came to America, and this had probably even more anime-inspired games than Nintendo. Okay, Nintendo was sort of, you could see there was a Japanese style there, especially with Legend of Zelda, but this game had tons of games. Outrun, Hang On, and all these anime-type games. Zillion, which was literally a cartoon show in Japan. Fantasy World, was it? No, the one with the little Opa Opa. There was a lot of games on here that were great. Teddy Boy, right? There was a game called Teddy Boy. You're a kid with a gun jumping around shooting like creatures that are like living, gambling, like chips and stuff like that. Crazy. The visuals and the music on this, I thought, were better than Nintendo. Okay. But I was going to learn a harsh lesson. Now I was going to experience as a young teenager what the market meant. Okay, right. When you got this was a huge thing in '86. 1 year later, couldn't find any games for this. Now it says 340 games were released. That's a lot. Okay, but in America, the games dried up. After a year, there was hardly any games for this, any new games. Whereas my friends who had Nintendo, they had games coming out, new games coming out all the time. Contra, all these games. Double Dragon, Street Fighter 2. You still had Alex Kidd doing rock, paper, scissors. It was depressing. There was no new games. In '87, there was nothing. Well, apparently, now looking back, what happened was Nintendo was just too strong in North America. So yours truly had to be the rebel back then and be different, and also had to pay for that by not having any new games to play. Right? However, and I didn't know this, the console took off in Europe and South America where Nintendo was weak. So if you talk to like British guys, right, or people in South America, or I assume even continental Europe, I don't know, but the British guys are the most that mention this. They love the Master System. They mention the Master System. They had games that we never got in America. So it was huge in the UK and in Latin America, like I said. Whereas in America, this was considered a joke. So I was asked out by the forces of history and video game corporate, strategies of trying to break into the market. Okay, I'll still say this was better than Nintendo. That's right. I don't care. I mean, Super Mario was hot, but bro, Space Harrier, dude. But anyway, so that's pretty much where it's gonna end for me here. I don't want to make a million videos on this, right? Once you get to past the mid-'80s, this is a cool book in general, right? A lot of stuff I never heard, particularly these older consoles that were not total failures and disappeared like this one. It's kind of interesting, and to see the old Nintendo, right? Some reason, this mystifies me the most. This thing, I want to play games on emulators. I want to find more emulations playing these games because some of these games I enjoyed playing, on the emulators. Hustle Chummy, right? Girls Garden. I know I'm gonna play a game called Girls Garden, but of course they had a cool Zaxxon. They had Orgus. Orgus was a game you could transform. Orgus, it was an anime series. You could actually transform, from the robot into the ship and fight, the enemies in it. In 1985 or '86, when I was thirsting for anything from Japan after Robotech, I would have loved to have a game like that. So, but this one really intrigues me. Also, the fact that it is sort of a holdover. It is more. This and the ColecoVision are literally the same system. Okay, and the ColecoVision, you could put some good games on here, but the games on here are a lot more rare. They got crazy names too. Pop Flamer was I mentioned Zaxxon. They have Choplifter. And a lot of other just weird, crazy games, right? Was it Ninja Princess? All these, obviously the Japanese were trying to appeal to all kinds of kids in Japan for this. So that's why this one I saw this, I said, this fascinates me. So I'm gonna look more into this, if I can play games on these emulators, because trying to get one of these is kind of difficult, and I just don't have a lot of space anymore that I want to do this. So that's the video game systems, right? I guess I will mention, I missed Sega Genesis came out in '89. I missed all this stuff. The Game Boy, I remember I wanted a Game Boy for Christmas, and I remember I was laughed at, so that didn't happen. But all these other ones, the only one and the Super NES, I remember my friend getting that, but I kind of was not into video games anymore. But I do remember playing in the late '90s this thing. My buddy had this when I was rooming with someone in Pennsylvania, and I remember playing this. I remember playing Resident Evil on the Sony PlayStation. Now Sony got into the video game thing, and there were CDs now. Okay, and of course the rest is history. I remember they used to have bootleg ones in Manhattan. They used to sell bootleg games for like the PlayStations and the Xbox. I remember the guy, you go to his thing by Columbus Circle, and he literally plugged the system into the street light, and you would go and you would buy these bootleg games for the system. I thought that was kind of cool. Good old days in New York. So anyway, that's your video game history. The game console. Was it good for us? Was it bad for us? I guess it doesn't matter now.